We have a really big Caribbean population here in New York, right? And I just didn't find anything that I felt like represented our community. And so I said to myself, you know what, there's a market for this. We are a big enough community that we can have our own platforms. And I was like, someone needs to start this. Hey guys, my name's Juanita. I'm the founder of Caribbean Collective magazine. I represent the beautiful country of Guyana. Caribbean Collective is the first magazine founded for Caribbean women by Caribbean women, representing women living in the UK, Canada, and the US. I'm super excited to be here today and answer some fun questions. So Caribbean Collective came to me probably about 8 years ago. I started out as an editor on a bigger magazine called Brown Girl Magazine that has a vertical for Indo-Caribbean women. And I was finding that anytime I looked up things for Caribbean women, or I just wanted to find articles or things that represented our community, all the platforms were in the Caribbean. But it was odd because we have a really big Caribbean population here in New York, right? And I just didn't find anything that I felt like represented our community. And I was like, anything that's out there is in the Caribbean, but there's so many people living in Canada and Brooklyn, Miami, Florida, the UK, but there was nothing to represent like our hyphenated identity being Caribbean American or Caribbean Canadian. And so I said to myself, you know what, there's a market for this. We are a big enough community that we can have our own platforms. And I was like, someone needs to start this. So in 2020, as you know, a lot of us were home for a long period of time. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start this. And I did. And, I didn't know what to expect. And little by little, people started following. A lot of people reach out. They're like, hey, could you please tell my story? I want to get this article published. And we just built a community. And I think it's amazing. It's a platform that was much needed to a community that I really feel was underrepresented. You know, another reason I started the magazine, I was finding anytime I saw like my Afro-Caribbean sisters being represented, it was more so on African-American platforms. And the same with Indo-Caribbean women, they were being represented, let's say, on South Asian platforms. But there was still a gap, right? We're more than just our ethnicity. African-American culture isn't Caribbean culture, and South Asian culture isn't necessarily Indo-Caribbean culture either. And so I felt that, by just creating the platform and giving it a voice and allowing it to be a platform where women can share their stories, that allowed us to finally have representation for women with that hyphenated identity. Oh, the culture. I think it's really cool to live in New York, but to go back home for Trinidad, I think it's cool to be here when it's cold, but to be able to, hop on a plane ride, go back to Guyana, St. Lucia, whatever island you represent. I think the culture, the music, the food, the people, I love carnival culture. One thing that I love about Caribbean women is we're very, we have a lot of aunties that, have toxic auntie culture, I call it, but Caribbean women are very free and liberating. You go to carnival, you see people with different body types, just being themselves, being happy and free. I think that we're strong women. We have a lot of culture, and I think we've created a fusion identity, in places like Canada, the US, and the UK. So I was actually met with, a lot of reception. I think the only obstacle I faced was maybe in my head. When I first started the platform, I was like, I'm going to start an Instagram, and it's going to be my 10 friends that follow me, and that's it. And it turned out to be a lot more than that. I got a lot of positive community reception because, like I said, I think our community was really starving to have a platform that really represents women. One thing that really stands out about our platform is, although we love to do beauty, fashion, and entertainment, I feel like we address a lot of women's issues. We've talked about generational trauma, we've talked about mental health, we've talked about things like abuse and just underrepresentation, colorism, body positivity, a lot of things that I think don't get spoken about within the context of our culture. So I think we address a lot of the things that haven't been addressed before. We have the tough discussions. Like, for instance, I think mental health is a very taboo thing in our community. There's also, homophobia. There are a lot of issues that I think our generation, millennials and Gen Zers specifically, are starting to address. And so we've created the platform where we can have those tough discussions. being a Guyanese American, we've always prided ourselves on being a country that has different ethnicities and races. And so diversity is very important. One of the key elements of the magazine is that our writers represent different backgrounds. I have Indo-Caribbean, I have, Grenadian, I have Trinidadian. I have women that essentially represent different islands and different ethnicities. And I think more importantly, we talk about these different ethnicities and our different experiences. One story that stands out to me, for instance, is, we did a series on an artist who is a Muslim Caribbean woman, and we talked about the work that she's doing. She's Toronto or Canadian based, but we talk about these smaller communities within the larger community, and we really try to amplify their voices. And so I think to ensure diversity, what's really important is that the stories represent different people within the culture, and that the team and the writers also represent both smaller and bigger islands. And that's another thing that was really important to me when I started the magazine. As I said, a lot of the representation was more so based on ethnicity than culture. And so I started this for culture. But the second part of it is to also represent parts of the Caribbean that aren't talked about, right? Like if you go to a fete or a party, we all know Jamaica, we know Haiti, we know like the bigger Trinidad and Tobago, we know the bigger islands, but I want to do stories on smaller islands. And so I think that's something that's really important. Even one story that stands out is, for Black History Month, we did a series on the French Caribbean, and we called it Black Herstory, where we talked about French Caribbean women who've really made history and have stood out. But this is not something you're going to read in U.S. English books or history books, right? So I think always amplifying voices, always telling stories within the larger demographic and representing smaller pockets within the community is how we ensure diversity. So there are quite a few stories that stick out, but one story that really sticks out to me is a few years ago, we actually did a story on a Trinidadian marine biologist. Her name is Dr. Diva, and she was featured on Disney Plus in a National Geographic series. And so that was really cool. Our readers really loved that and essentially ate that story up. I find that really interesting because a lot of times there are Caribbean women in positions of power, but we don't know that they're Caribbean because there's no one really celebrating that or highlighting that. And so I think that was amazing because I feel there's a lot of young women in science within our culture that can look to somebody like Dr. Diva and say, hey, she's Trinidadian like me, or she's a Caribbean woman, a Caribbean gal, and she looks just like me, and look at what she's doing. I can do it too. And so I think a lot of times we get grouped into larger groups, and while that's not a bad thing, there's diversity in being brown and black, right? And I think it's important we celebrate that. And so I think that story really stood out, and a lot of people loved it. So, I was born in Guyana. My family moved to Brooklyn when I was 2. At 3 years old, we relocated to Newark, New Jersey. Coming from a Caribbean household, you're always told, go to school, get your education, get higher education, meet the guy, fall in love, get married. And so there's this structure that we're told to live by, right? But as I got older, I realized when I was in college, there's nothing wrong with 9 to 5, but I felt that if I was doing 9 to 5, I was going to be limited in terms of my income. And so I sort of built, or it gave me an entrepreneurial spirit to really delve into other business ventures that allowed me to take a risk, but allowed my income to not be limitless. And so I did that. Full time I work as a wealth manager. About 7 years ago, I also have a mobile beauty business I've started on the side. I manage a team of about 8 artists. And so I've always been entrepreneurial because I've seen the benefit. I love community, but I also love working for myself, but still being able to be profitable. And so I've always had that creative / entrepreneurial bone. And so when I thought of Caribbean Collective, I was like, this is a creative project of mine that I really want to use to launch a community, right? And so I was never afraid to do it. I think the only hiccup I thought I would run into is that nobody might follow. I thought it was just going to be people that knew me, but that wasn't the case. I misjudged it, and it's as I thought. We were starving essentially for a platform outside of the Caribbean that represented Caribbean women with that hyphenated identity. But that's essentially how I got started, and I think that's why I wasn't afraid, because it wasn't my first entrepreneurial endeavor, my first time taking a risk. I think two things. Mentorship is really important. Find somebody who's accessible to you. Don't just go and try to get in the inbox of the CEO of the top 500 of Fortune or whatever company you're looking at. I recommend maybe looking at somebody who's a little bit more reachable. I'd reach out to them, connect with them. There are tons of Caribbean platforms that allow for networking. I would go to those and maybe network with people who are already in the industry. I'd even reach out and email different platforms that you feel like are accessible to you. But I think mentorship is very important. And then I also think studying brands or people that you look up to. Kind of look at their story and what it is that they did and make it your own, right? We never want to copy what someone else did, but what we really do want to do is you can use a blueprint, but really make it your own. And so I think mentorship, doing the necessary research is really important. I think having a conversation with yourself where, you commit to really, pursuing your creative passions is important. Because a lot of times creatives have ideas, but we don't always know how to monetize them. Or it's what starts off as a great idea just ends up being something that you fade out at in 2 years. You really have to have a real conversation with yourself and make sure you're serious. And then if you are, seek out mentorship and then seek out brands or people that you look up to. Kind of follow and study what they did. Research the topics. It depends on what it is that you want to do. But there are tons of courses in journalism and media and in PR and things like that. A lot of them are free out there, but really educate yourself and I think network with the right people. That's really important. Hey guys, it's been amazing. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating a platform that also highlights women. To read more about the magazine, follow us at www.caribbeancollectivemag.com. You can find us on Instagram at Caribbean Collective Mag. If you want to see more about me, in my fun time, I love to travel and just kind of share cool gems that I find in New York City. You can follow me at _beautiful_Wanderluster. Thanks.